Peak Human.
Les humains à leur meilleur.
C'est tu apogeo.
Peak 人間
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Peak Human. I'm Brian Sanders. I'm making the Food Lies film. I founded sapien.org and nosetotale.org. And here's another great episode with my new pal, Kiran Krishnan. And he is a microbiologist. He's super smart. He's great at explaining a lot of this microbiome stuff and immunity stuff that I think is really important. And we're learning more and more about each month. So, straight to it, Kiran Krishnan is a research microbiologist who has been involved in the nutrition industry for the past 17 years. His early work involved hands-on research and development in the fields of molecular medicine and microbiology at the University of Iowa. He is a frequent lecturer on the human microbiome at medical and nutrition conferences and health summits and a regular expert guest on national and satellite radio. He is also a founder of Microbiome Labs, a company dedicated to researching the microbiome and providing research-based probiotics for patients. Again, I think this one's really great. He's such a good communicator. You'll learn so much about the immune system and the microbiome. But before we get to the episode, I just have to remind everyone about the Sapien program and the tribe. The program is where we help you change your life, lose weight, reverse chronic disease, navigate your way through the Sapien diet, the Sapien framework. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. We take the best of all dietary approaches and put them together, and we help you implement in your life with health coaches. We have a 10-week program. Go to sapien.org to check it out. We also have the tribe, where you get all the bonus episodes of this podcast, the extended show notes, the private feed, the private Zoom calls with Dr. Gary and I, and a bunch of other stuff. Check that out at sapien.org and also nosetotale.org. This is why we can have no sponsors of this podcast. Nosetotale.org is my company. We have a ranch in Texas and we ship out grass-finished, sustainable, and humanely raised animals. We have the primal ground beef with the organs mixed in. This is so good. This is the best way to get organs in your diet. It has kidney, heart, liver, and spleen all mixed in. It's out of stock a lot. You got to get it while you can. We have it with beef as well as buffalo and pork sometimes with our high omega-3, low omega-6 pork. And we have the breakfast sausage and some other primal ground products with the pork. We also have the low omega-6 chicken. Not a lot of people are doing this, and it's not cheap to do. We have to feed them a special diet, but the chicken has the best low PUFA ratios you can get. Usually I avoid chicken because it's not particularly nutritious and it's not raised well, but we do it correctly. It has an ancestrally appropriate balance of omega-6, omega-3s, so check that out at nosetotale.org. We have the new seasonings. I'm so close to launching the beef tallow skincare products and a couple other great products that I can't wait to share. Just hang tight. It's going to be awesome. So on to the episode. Make sure you start back at episode 1. Every week I get news stories of people who have changed their life by listening to all the great guests. And I try to just do one good episode with each guest. So you have to go back and catch all the old ones. All right, well, on to the show. I think I messed up the guest name again and called him Kiran because I had a friend named Kiran before, but I believe it's Kiran. So here is Kiran Krishnan, the great microbiologist. Please enjoy. Let's get going. Kiran Krishnan, how are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm excited to talk to you. I've listened to a bunch of podcasts with you. In my mind, the best communicators about the microbiome and the immune system and all this stuff. Yeah, and I haven't done that many episodes on this. And I think the microbiome is one of those things where we don't know as much as we think. And a lot of people go overboard. They're like, oh, I'm a microbiome expert. And then some other people are like, we know 2% of what's going on. How much do we know?
Yeah, you can easily say it's one of the most well-studied topics, but that doesn't mean we know a fraction of what there is to know, right? The estimate is there's around 50,000 published studies on the microbiome in the last 5 years only. There's an insane amount of work. But then when you start digging into it, you really realize that what we know is really kind of scratching the surface, because there are things that occur within the microbiome that biological science cannot explain even fundamentally, like communication between microbes and other microbes in different parts of the body that occur almost instantaneously. Communication between our cells and microbes that occur not through a format that we understand, like through inflammatory cytokines or proteins or whatever it may be. There are things that are happening in this complex ecosystem that we don't have the science to explain yet. Just to provide people a little bit degree of confidence, there are some things that we know quite well about the microbiome. But I would say that, to give them an analogy, right, it took some of the top scientists in the world somewhere around 10, 12 years to really figure out the human genome, right? And that was sequencing the human genome end to end, identifying different genes, what their functions may be, somewhere around 12, 13 years. And we're still kind of working on that even as we speak. And human genome only has about 22,000 functional genes. The microbiome has over 3.5 million functional genes, right? So it is an ocean, the depths of which we don't even have a tool to measure. But it's a fascinating time because we're finally learning more and more about how we function, because so much of our function, estimates are over 90% of our function, comes from the microbiome.
What are some of the other numbers? Like, you can throw out some of these numbers of just the amount of bacteria in our body, the amount of cells compared to humans, that type of stuff.
Yeah, and so some of that has changed over time as we got a little bit deeper into the science and better ways of measuring the microbiome more accurately. But the best measure right now is that we have somewhere around 40 trillion microbes that live in and on us, and that's just a mind-boggling number, right? It's the kind of numbers that you see when we're talking about deficits and debts of like massive countries like the US, right? It's not a number that is tangible for most people, 40 trillion. And then compare that to somewhere around 10 to 20 trillion or so human cells that we have within our own system. And so, we have anywhere from 2 to 4 times more microbial cells in our system. One analogy I like to give that's actually, to me, even more mind-boggling about that is we talk a lot about the immune system, right? And our immune system is clearly our defense mechanism in our body, and it's surveying our entire system. It's trying to protect us from invading things like bacteria and viruses. And inside our body, we've got about 4,000 square feet of surface area, of mucosal surface, that the immune system has to patrol and has to protect us from. Those are all areas of entry for viruses, bacteria, and other things that may make us sick. Now, in that surface area, we've got over 40 trillion microbial cells that look a lot like the invading bacteria and viruses and all that. And in order to patrol that whole area, you've got about 200 million immune cells, right? So it's a 200,000 to 1 ratio, meaning for every 200,000 bacterial, viral, fungi particles, you've got 1 immune cell that is surveying that entire area, right? So how in the world can the immune system effectively survey this entire system and detect invading pathogens quick enough to neutralize them before they can have enough time to replicate and create large copy numbers of themselves? That part alone, to me, as a microbiologist and someone that studies immunology really closely, is mind-boggling when you think about the task that your immune system has. It's a 200,000 to 1 ratio. The analogy I give is like if you're at a music festival and you've got 200,000 people at this music festival, you might have, let's say, 5 people that are potentially harmful to the rest, and you're the lone security guard in a sea of 200,000 people, right? And it's your job to find those 5 people that could be problematic out of the 200,000. It's an impossible task. And so the only way that you could possibly do that is if the other 199,995 people were all on your side, radioed into you, and were your eyes and ears in the big music festival, right? The moment they saw something unusual, they would radio into you and tell you exactly where they are and what they're seeing, and then you can hone in on that particular area. If not, it'd be impossible for you to go one by one to each person, tap them on the shoulder, and examine who they are, right? So that's the task of our immune system. And the only way our immune system can survey that whole area is because the microbiome acts as the neighborhood watch for the immune system. Those microbes, and that includes viruses, bacteria, fungi, but a large part bacteria, they are keeping an eye out for each of these little ecosystems. When they see something new come in, that could be harmful to the host, they shoot off flares to direct the immune system to that area. Just that part alone is just mind-boggling when we think about how the microbiome is structured, how it functions, and how intimately we are connected to it.
Wow. So this is some of the stuff that you're talking about with this communication we don't even understand yet, is how is this possible?
Totally. I mean, so when you think about it, so this is how the communication goes. For example, let's take influenza, right? So flu season's coming up. We're all going to get exposed to some degree of the flu virus. So when the flu virus enters, and it enters, let's say, into your upper respiratory tract, the first thing that actually detects the presence of the flu virus is the microbes that live in that part of the upper respiratory tract. They will actually then send signals to the microbes in the gut. The microbes in the gut will then send signals to the immune system in the gut to send dendritic cells and macrophages to the site in the lungs. Once dendritic cells and macrophages come to the site in the lungs, they then recruit T cells that are maturing in the localized lymph nodes to mature the anti-influenza T cells. Once they mature and they're ready, then the T cells show up to the spot and neutralize and kill off the influenza. But that whole communication cascade starts with the microbes in the lungs communicating with the microbes in the gut. How do they do that? We don't know. That's a mind-boggling thing. Like, how do the microbes know they're there? And how do the microbes, what signals do they send them? How do they direct it towards the gut, right? In the body, we know how to direct things through vascular systems, right? Through our lymphatic systems. Like, it goes through your lymph, it goes through your vessels or your arteries. It can go from your heart to your brain through all of the circulatory system. But how does a microbe sitting on your lung communicate with a microbe that's sitting in your gut? We have no idea.
That's amazing. And I heard you say that 80% of immune health is in the gut lining.
Yeah, it's clear to see why that would be. The gut is like the major sampling site of everything that enters or surrounds you in your body, because most of the orifices that things can enter in, so if you think about your eyes, your ears, your nose, and of course your mouth, everything drains into the digestive tract, right? So your ears, the eustachian tubes drain into your throat. The nose, all of the nasal passages, all of the sinus cavities, all drain into your throat. Your eyes all drain into your throat. So when something enters your eyes, it's going to eventually drain into your throat. So everything drains into your throat and gets swallowed. And because it's getting swallowed, it's then being presented to the gut immune tissue. And the gut immune tissue then has the opportunity to understand everything that the body is exposed to, because everything gets funneled into the gut. And the interesting thing about the gut immune tissue is that, like I said, 80% or so, all the immune tissue in your body is in the gut. But every millimeter of that immune tissue is covered with bacteria and viruses and all that already. Right? So you are an immune cell, an immune tissue sitting in the gut trying to do your job. You're trying to identify things like viruses and bacteria that are going to be problematic to your host, or your host. And all the while, you're covered in viruses and bacteria. And so, and as it turns out, you need that covering in order to function, because studies show when you raise mice, for example, that are called no-biotic mice, these are sterile mice that are raised without a microbiome, you expose it to like a rotavirus or an influenza virus, the mouse cannot elicit an immune response to it. The mouse's immune system just sits there staring at the invading pathogen. It does not know what to do. And then you slowly introduce microbiome to the mouse and then reinfect it again with the same influenza virus. And then all of a sudden it can mount this effective immune response. Microbiome that's sitting on all of that immune tissue is teaching the immune tissue each and every minute of each and every day how to function, what to look for, and how to mount a response.
That's so interesting. I do want to get into this stuff. But first, I want to just make sure the audience kind of realizes the whole digestive system is exposed. It's the outside, right? From your mouth to your anus is outside. So we have this whole system to protect us because it's essentially the outside world.
It is, yeah. And so even though we put something into our digestive tract and it's seemingly inside your body because you can't see it anymore, it's still considered the outside of the body because it's a tube that's open on both ends. It's an end to end. So the tube part, the space in the tube where things go through, is called the lumen. The lumen of your digestive tract is considered by all means outside of the body, just the same as your skin is considered outside of the body, right? If something's sitting on your skin, it's still outside of the body. And that's where all of the big decisions are made. both immunologically, like we talked about, because most of the immune tissue's there, but then also that's where the decisions are made as to what to let in to your body, right? Because most of what we consume and that ends up inside our body goes through the digestive tract, but it has to go through the lining of the digestive tract before it gets to circulation. And once it's in circulation, then it's officially in your body. So that whole lining of the digestive tract is one of the most active parts of your body. And that's why when you have dysfunction in the lining of the intestinal tract, it is one of the biggest risk factors for virtually every chronic illness, because that is ground zero of where your body makes decisions on how to respond to things, and where your body makes decisions on what to let in and what not to let in. And if that decision-making process is compromised in some way, then things are going to get in that shouldn't be getting in. That will lead to disease.
That's super interesting. We're going to get to that for sure. All these chronic diseases that we get today, we're definitely going to get to that later. But I want to hit the flu, like you said already. This is hot on people's mind, coronavirus going around. So ever since I cleaned up my diet 5 years ago, I haven't gotten sick. I don't never. And then everyone I know in our little health world, like, hey, I don't get sick anymore. So you said, yes, we're going to expose to the virus, right? Influenza comes around each year and we're exposed. So we talk about this, and you can't necessarily really hide from a virus. You can, maybe. I mean, if you're isolated enough and you're really, really isolated, but you are exposed to viruses nonstop. And this is just how our immune system works. This is normal business.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our immune system is so well equipped to handle exposure to the vast majority of things we'll ever come in contact with in our lives, right? One of the things they said, for example, about the novel coronavirus, and it's in the name novel, is that we have no quote unquote immunity against it, which is a misnomer in a way. What they're meaning is that we don't have memory against it, meaning we don't have antibodies that have previously been generated, or we don't have memory T cells against it. But it does not mean that our immune system does not know what to do with it, right? Our immune system is perfectly well capable of handling a virus like that. And it's got huge number of tools in its tool belt to be able to handle something like that. The big question is your immune system functioning the way it's supposed to? Or is there a compromise to your immune system? Let me give a couple examples of how simply your immune system can be compromised so that it cannot handle something as simple as the influenza virus or something like the novel coronavirus. And we know what the risk factors are for those things, right? So right now, the biggest risk factor, and this has been adjusted from age, is obesity, right? So obesity, diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease are the biggest risk factors for having a really bad infection and high complications with COVID-19. And of course, the mortality rate for someone who's diabetic versus someone who's not diabetic, who's in the same age group, is somewhere around 10 times higher, right? So if you're diabetic, your risk for dying from getting COVID exposure is 10 times higher than somebody your exact same age who's not diabetic. Same thing with heart disease, over 4.5 times higher. Obesity, I think, is somewhere around 7 times higher. So if you're obese and you're diabetic, then you're really in an increased risk factor for developing complications. Now, why is that, right? So what is the connection there between, let's say, diabetes or hypertension and this compromised immune response to something like COVID? The main reason is because of something called chronic low-grade inflammation. I mentioned this earlier, where when influenza, as an example, enters into your lungs, same thing with COVID, when it enters into your lungs, one of the first things that detects its presence is the microbiota in that area, right? The microbiota in that area is going to detect that something new is coming in, and then it's going to shoot off signals to try to recruit your immune system to that area to pay attention to it. At the same time, the initial cells that start to get infected first will also help shoot off signals in order to recruit your immune system to that area. Your cells will also start producing things like interferon to try to slow down the viral replication in that localized area. But in order to actually take care of the virus, you need your innate immune cells, which are your dendritic cells, macrophages, natural killer cells, all of these different types of fast-acting immunological cells to show up there and start quenching down the virus and its ability to replicate, right? So that has to happen to defend your system. And remember, the signals that are sent from the microbiome or your localized cells to tell your immune system that something's going on here are inflammatory markers, right? So they're shooting off inflammatory cytokines to try to get the attention of your immune system. What's happening with somebody who has diabetes? Somebody who has diabetes has something called chronic low-grade inflammation. They have inflammation throughout their body, right? There's inflammation everywhere. So now a virus comes in and your microbiome and the infected cells are shooting off inflammatory flares here in the local area, but they've got inflammation everywhere else in the body. Their immune system doesn't see the signals. The signals get drowned out, right? So imagine you've got a house that's on fire and the smoke alarm's going off, but every other house in the neighborhood also has smoke alarms going off, even though they're not on fire. The fire truck will have no idea where to go. So it's just that one simple concept that really identifies why you can really compromise your immune system. So one of the things you've done with your change in diet and cleaning up your eating is you've reduced the chronic low-grade inflammation that you're seeing in your body. Now your immune system's there ready to respond to signals when they see it. They get there quick enough, it shuts down the virus replication quick, so you never knew you ever had it. If it takes your immune system longer to get there, because your immune system's not picking up those inflammatory signals, then the virus has a lot of time to replicate. So imagine this, one virus will go into one of your cells. It'll hijack that cell. It'll use that cell's replication machinery to make more copies of itself. And about 300 to 400 viruses will bust out of that one cell, right? And then each of those viruses will go to 300 to 400 other cells, make another 300 to 400 copies of each of them. And so it grows exponentially very quickly. If it takes your immune system 2-3 days to detect that something's going wrong in that area, you're going to now have this massive viral load. And then where you feel sick is when your immune system does finally show up. And then it goes, holy crap, there's so many viruses here. Now your immune system's mounting an insane inflammatory response. That starting the process of the, what do you call it, cytokine storm. Yeah. And then now you're really starting to feel sick. Because remember, the feeling of sick, the symptoms of sick is actually the immune response to the pathogen, right? The fever, the body aches, the inflammation, all of that stuff is the immune response. But when your immune system finally responds, it has to respond in such a massive, robust way because now there's so many virus particles roaming about that now you feel really incredibly sick. Whereas somebody who's relatively healthy would have gotten the same virus, within a short amount of time, it would have been shut down, right? And so all of that is connected to the microbiome, not only because you need the localized microbiome who's there to support your immune system to alert it, but the biggest source of chronic low-grade inflammation comes from a dysfunctional gut, a leaky gut. Leaky gut is the number one driver for the development of type 2 diabetes. So the individual that has type 2 diabetes already has a messed up gut, and it's the messed up gut that cause the development of type 2 diabetes. And that same messed up gut microbiome causes a messed up upper respiratory microbiome. And so you don't have enough of the right microbes in that space to signal the immune system. So it's a double whammy, and you're going to get a compromised immune response.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I kind of intuitively knew this before I started studying nutrition, is that there was this chronic inflammation that was going on in so many people and you don't know it, or even with allergies or with all these other things that I had, just little problems like, oh, you have indigestion every once in a while and you have allergies and you have this chronic inflammation has been going on for so long that you don't even realize that. You think it's normal, but totally. It's kind of the root of all of this stuff.
It is. It's no doubt anymore. 15 years ago, when people in the functional medicine space was talking about inflammation and how dangerous it is, it was kind of poo-pooed on, right, by allopathic medicine because there wasn't large-scale data on this stuff. It made sense mechanistically, but there wasn't some big pharmaceutical study on it. And so most doctors and all wouldn't pay attention to it. But now we've got massive studies from huge institutions like the NIH and the American Diabetic Association, American Heart Association, that that confirms without a shadow of a doubt that chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the biggest risk factors for driving all kinds of conditions within the body. And the thing is, it becomes like basement level dysfunction, and it can show up in many different ways. If you had chronic low-grade inflammation and you eat too much sweets, that's going to show up primarily as diabetes. Mm-hmm. If you have chronic low-grade inflammation, you have family history of heart disease, and on top of that, you eat poorly and you're not exercising, it's going to show up as coronary artery disease. If you have chronic low-grade inflammation, you have some family history of Alzheimer's, and you're not taking care of yourself, it's going to show up as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. It becomes the basement that sets you up for chronic illness, and then other factors around you will dictate which of the conditions you end up developing. That's the reason why 6 out of 10 Americans have at least one chronic illness. 4 out of 10 American adults, 40% of American adults have multiple chronic illnesses, right? Why is it that they have so many? Is it that because they have so many dysfunctional genes? Nope. It's because they've got the foundation for disease set up, and then their other behaviors dictate where the
manifestation.
The manifestation of it. Yeah. And if you don't allow that foundation for disease, which is that chronic low-grade inflammation, then your risk for the manifestation becomes much lower. In some cases, there's a genetic component that is hard to overcome. But as it turns out, that is really rare compared to the lifestyle component of the setup, where you've set up this foundation for chronic illness, and then you will manifest it based on other things.
This is super important information, and it kind of makes sense of the whole world. I've had all kinds of different guests on talking about all the different things, but it really does go back to the microbiome, I think. And then, yes, the individual circumstances, how it manifests. And what's interesting to me is when I was eating, say I had this stages of going through my diet, and there was a stage where I'd only eat like bread once a day, and then I'd clean or like lower carb otherwise. And then I felt a certain way and got to a certain level of health. But then when I changed it to maybe only once a week, then I got to a whole nother, instead of eating, say, some kind of bread or gluten once a day to once a week. So it's interesting. Maybe you can explain a little more like the difference between doing something acutely and chronically, because that was pretty profound for me. It's like, I don't even like sneeze or cough or have a runny nose, or I have nothing anymore.
Right. Yeah. And here's the thing. And it's not that. So when we define sick, we define symptomologies of illness, right? Many of us who remain relatively healthy and don't get the symptoms, for example, of the flu, it doesn't mean we are not encountering the flu. You're encountering everything. Your body is just able to take care of it before you ever need to see symptoms, right? So the difference between, let's say, eating bread once a day to once a week, what you're doing is allowing your body adequate time to repair. One of the things that we really take for granted is the amazing ability of our body to repair damage, right? There's so many mechanisms in place in virtually every part of your body that can induce repair, kind of like Wolverine-like repair, but not that fast, right? It takes time. And the same thing happens in your gut. So when you have resilience in your gut, you can have a little bit more freedom. You can eat the bread once a week. It's going to cause some damage, but then your body now has time to repair it. The analogy I give people, just to make it more real world, is like, we all know when we were younger, we could sleep very little, party a lot, and still wake up the next day and function, right? That's because our repair mechanisms were working much better when we were younger. As you get older, that becomes harder and harder to do. If we go out to like a company event and we have a couple too many drinks one night, you're going to feel it for the next couple of days, right? It used to be you could do that every night for 5 days in a row and you'll be fine. But the reason for the difference is the ability to repair slows down over time. And so as we get older, it becomes more and more important to be cleaner and cleaner, and giving your body adequate time to repair in between things that are going to harm you. So I never believe that we can be 100% eating perfectly, living a perfect life. What you need to have is enough resilience where you can have some flexibility and then recover appropriately from that.
Yeah, I think that's super important. I'm not a fan, some people are like, I have like 2 glasses of wine a night. And I'm like, I just drink on the weekends socially and that's it. It's like, I'm not going to do it otherwise. I want my body to repair. Yep. And also what you're talking about, I had a great interview with Dr. Michael Rose. He's an aging researcher. He's been doing amazing research for decades on fruit flies and all kinds of stuff. He's basically saying the same thing you are, where the older you get, the more you have to just live a more evolutionary appropriate lifestyle.
Yeah.
That you just have to go back to that more paleo type of lifestyle because that's what your body needs and expects, and you're less resilient as you age.
Totally. You're less resilient. Your stem cells are a little bit slower to replicate. There's more prone to error in your DNA replication. Your vascular system doesn't work as well as it used to. Your heart doesn't pump as well as it used to. Your heart's a muscle. It, of course, gets aged over time. And speaking to somebody who studies things like aging and longevity, a really well-coined term right now, and that's the biggest topic in aging, is called inflamma-aging, right? It's how inflammation causes aging. And so again, it all kind of comes back to inflammation, because what is inflammation? Inflammation is damage, right? So if inflammation is going on in your body all the time, what's happening is this damage chronically happening in your body, and there isn't time to fix it. So you can deal with damage in your body if there's recovery time. It's no different than going out and lifting in the gym weights every day for 3 hours a day, right? You'll never make any gains, because all the gains are made when you rest, right? And when you recover. So imagine you did bench pressing every day, every single day of the week, forever. You'll never make any gains in your strength, your definition, because your muscles never are given the time to recover. Inflammation, chronic low-grade inflammation, is a constant damaging substance to all parts of your body. The other analogy I use for that is like if you get a cut, if you cut yourself accidentally, you're going to heal that cut in a few days. But if you keep recutting it every single day, it'll never heal. And then, in fact, it'll get worse and worse and worse over time. And so low-grade inflammation is that chronic cutting of the inside of your body. And that's why being able to slow that down and reduce the amount of chronic low-grade inflammation provides your body with the ability to heal, which also then gives you more resilience to go out and have drinks with your friends on a Friday or Saturday night. And while you're having drinks, eat something that you normally wouldn't eat. And then your body will recover from that over the next couple of days, and there'll be no long-term impact. Absolutely. That's a really important aspect of it, is that we need resilience. We need time to recover. We can't constantly be taxing the system.
Absolutely. And we have these figures that 88% of Americans are metabolically unwell. And I mean, you could say 88% of Americans are in a chronic state of inflammation. It's like, this is our modern diet and lifestyle. This is just what's happening. There's so few people. I mean, if we want to talk holistically about both sides, there's vegans versus carnivores, but at least both of the groups are making an effort to not be chronically inflamed and figure out their diet in some way. And then maybe vegans end up adding some fish back in their diet once they realize it doesn't work. But still.
Well, one quick comment on that is, and I don't follow any particular diet like that myself, right? I haven't found a camp that I can put myself in reasonably. But what I do like about those kind of diets is that they bring awareness to much more strategic eating. And then eventually they'll drive products that actually are healthier and provide more value to someone's consumption. Like, for example, because of the growth of organic, people wanting to eat organic, all of a sudden now Walmart becomes the biggest supplier of organic produce. When you have the world's largest retailer, now the concept of organic, now it becomes more available to your average person. Same thing with people who are very paleo. Now you've got snacks and meals and all that are more geared towards paleo, which tend to be a little bit more healthy than your conventional snacks and all that, right? So I do like that these dietary groups kind of pull at the middle. And what that does is it provides your average person with more choices. In myself, I don't fall into any one of those cases.
Yeah. Well, it's good if you don't have to. If you maintain your health, then maybe you don't have to get too extreme on your diet. And then also I like that too, is it pulls people to like grass-fed, grass-finished meat.
Totally.
Now there's more and more farmers, I'm pushing for that. Well, I have a company called Nose to Tail that does it, but still there's more and more. I encourage people, go to your local ranchers, go to the farmer's market. Costco has it now, it's spreading. So
yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, it was so hard to find grass-fed meat or free-range chicken. In my local area, the only way I could get it was to join a co-op. Now I could go to a store and buy organic grass-fed beef. It's like, so that's where the pull from the different sides, the different peripheries around the middle comes, and it creates more healthy options for people. So I think it's fantastic.
Okay, why isn't there a pull towards the mainstream in talking about immune health and about all the stuff you just said? Because tons of people have talked about this, the whole COVID, even big people as big as Bill Maher. He seems like the only one in the real public talking about it.
Right.
That we need to focus on our health. Why is a single government official talking about this stuff? It's all about stay home, wear a mask, be scared.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the big problems with how the typical media views the philosophies that we all share and talk about and provide evidence on all the time, right? So I've written articles for US News and World Report. I've been interviewed by more mainstream media outlets, and they're very specific in their vetting of the information because they all follow a pharmaceutical model. That's the mainstream model, right? So if I want to talk about how vitamin C can be an important part of what you do this fall, and especially if you relate it to something like COVID, in order to be able to go on like US News and have that conversation, you need to be able to show them a massive double-blind placebo-controlled study showing that vitamin C somehow treats COVID, right? You have to provide them that evidence for them to give you the platform. And so because we don't have that, and because they don't have the capability of following scientific logic, it's just black and white, they can't make those decisions, right? They can't go, this is good for this, which means that this must be good for this.
Yeah.
Make that connection. Yeah, it's just editors and people like that have no concept of science, and they're just trying to make their job more secure.
Well, we have some of these with vitamin D coming out actually RCTs, and then we do have super good evidence on the comorbidities.
Yeah.
So they still don't want to talk about that.
No, and I think it'll start coming out more. I mean, from what I saw, Fauci mentioned he takes vitamin D and vitamin C. I think most recently, this was sometime 2-3 months.
He did it in passing on a live stream, but it was like almost like an accident. And he's never said it publicly. He did it on someone's live stream with some actress or something.
Yeah, like he wouldn't come out and make that a recommendation, which is really unfortunate. But part of the reason is also that in the natural medicine world and the health, nutrition, lifestyle world, we are unfortunately still on the fringe. It's still called alternative medicine, right? As if it's some sort of a skewed choice over the normal medicine. But the good news is it's growing. And one of the benefits of the internet is that you can spread this kind of messaging quite widely without having to be on CNN or on Fox or on MSNBC, right? That's why these kind of programs are so important. Part of my reason for always dedicating time in my schedule to get to do programs like yours is this kind of information can be powerful to people. And ultimately, when you've got something like a contagion that is spreading around, and sure enough, it's making some people very sick, people are dying from it, the best thing you can do is just improve your resilience, right? We can't avoid it forever. At some point, you're likely going to come across it. And many people, without even knowing, have already come across it. But the best thing you can do, the thing that's well within your control, is improving your resilience, right? The things like public policy and what the politicians are going to choose to do, what kind of vaccine the pharma companies are developing, what's happening with the travel bans, all that stuff. Most of that is completely outside of your control, right? What you can control is what's happening in your system. And if we just kind of keep improving our system, becoming more resilient, we don't have to worry about these kind of things.
I love that. That's the takeaway message I always try to say. And people are still deathly afraid. Also, like Bill Maher said it too. I don't even agree with Bill Maher a lot, but he's like, if they said 3 months ago, you have 3 months, or it's been 6 months now, work on your health. Stop eating junk food. You may go for a run, all this type of stuff. You could drastically change your health in 6 months. I know a great woman named Laura Spath that lost half her body weight in 10 months. She went from 280 to 140 pounds.
Wow. Yeah.
Just eating meat. And it's like she drastically changed her immune health. This was before COVID, but if she did that during COVID, she would be in a much better place. Maybe you could just talk about a little more about this specific COVID thing, because people are so scared of like herd immunity. Maybe we could talk about, and just the fact that it is around. Like coronaviruses have existed for years. They will exist. We've had the flu vaccine for 40 years. It's been pretty widely circulated, and people still get the flu every year. I don't get why people think that even if we do have a vaccine that's proven safe for COVID, that all of a sudden we're all safe and happy. And no, you still have to worry about your own immune health and your response to this.
Totally. Yeah. And the very next COVID is around the corner. It's not like we are somehow going to create this barrier where we never have another pandemic virus that comes along. I mean, we basically have one every other year, right? The H1N1 keeps coming back. The bird flu keeps, the swine flu keeps coming back. Things like Zika was around for the last several years. I know people that cancel vacations to the Caribbean because they're worried about Zika. So there's going to be stuff that comes around all the time, and there's likely pathogens around us that we haven't even named yet or know that exist. Ultimately, the best thing you can do is really focus in on yourself. The things that I think are less beneficial to people is getting really caught up in like all of the things you cannot control, right? So like focusing on like the vaccines or the public policy or maybe the conspiracies that are going on, like all of those things, what they tend to do is create angst and anxiety in people. When you create anxiety, that is actually one of the most potent ways that it disrupts your microbiome. Stress is from a 2015 paper in Frontiers of Immunology, and this was a meta-analysis paper. They were able to show, based on lots of other published studies, that stress was the number one driver of mortality and morbidity worldwide in non-communicable diseases. So these are diseases that we can't give to one another, chronic illness, right, in general. So stress was the number one cause of mortality and morbidity. And that the way stress causes all the mortality and morbidity is it creates dysfunction in your microbiome and opens up the gut lining, so your gut becomes extremely leaky. And so all kinds of things that are going through your system every day leak into your circulatory system. They call it translocation. So it's a translocation of viral and bacterial particles from your lumen, which is still, remember, outside of the body, like we talked about, leaking into your circulation. That then sets up this chronic low-grade inflammation, which then becomes the foundation for disease. So if you're spending a lot of time on social media and you're getting angry looking through all of these things, and you're working through the conspiracy theories, or you're working through what this politician is doing, that politician is doing, what the pharma companies are doing, and it's working you up, know that you're making yourself more susceptible to a really bad response should you come in contact with this virus, right? If you spent time listening to programs like this and just getting education and empowering yourself with knowledge of how to improve your health, and then you spent that time improving your health, then you have nothing to worry about. You can kind of go about your day and function the way you want to function, knowing that you have a good degree of resilience. Right. That to me is really where the effect should be. And I could say early on in the pandemic, I was following a lot of the numbers and all that regularly in part because I was doing a lot of interviews about it. So I wanted to make sure I kept up with the numbers and what was going on. I can't tell you the last time I looked at where the COVID numbers were. It's immaterial to me, right? To me, what I know is I can focus on mine and my family's health. And we're doing everything we can to maintain a healthy gut, healthy immune system. We're not going to things like indoor concert. We're not going to go to it right now. We just don't need that kind of exposure or risk. But we're going out to eat. We're going out to the stores. We're doing most of the things we would normally do. But we're really focusing on our health, right? That's the key. And I love that you bring up the Bill Maher thing, because if that was the message in March when all of this crap started and we said, okay, we don't know when this is going to end, and we don't know where this is going to go, and we don't know when the vaccine is going to come, we don't know all these things. What we do know is that the more resilient you are, the less of a problem it's going to be, not only for you, but everyone else around you. And so here's information and program how to become healthier over the next 6 months. We would not only be in a better state of mind from COVID, but as a country as a whole, we would be in so much better shape, because healthcare costs is one of the biggest costs of burdens that we have, right?
Yeah, it's huge. And I've seen people go both ways. Yeah, I've seen people, some during lockdown, they got really fit, they climbed to the diet. Some people went the opposite, they ate trash and they're a mess. So I love that you also talked about reasonable exposure going back into the world, because I'm really I had a great conversation with Joel Salatin, the regenerative farmer, who talked about him drinking out of the trough of the cows. He's exposing himself to this stuff. I love that I have a dog and I get all kinds of weird stuff from the dog.
Totally.
We need to be exposing ourselves. That's why I'm a little extra bitter about the officials not saying anything about this, because if you're just staying home, you bring ultra sanitary, you're spreading Purell on everything, you could maybe be doing worse. what do you think? Like you're getting your immune system lower by having zero contact with anything, wiping everything down, being scared, that stress, like all these things are making our immune system lower.
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when all of this started, and there was a period of time starting in March, April, part of May, where we didn't really go out anywhere. Like, nothing was really open that month.
Yeah. That times, yeah.
What we did make sure to do is still go outside, right? We were like, well, if we're not going to normal public places, we're going to go out for hikes. We're going to be out in the park. We're going to go for a walk by the river over here by us. So we spent a lot of time going outside that way. But exposure to other humans is important. Even if you're not going around and hugging everybody, people may not be comfortable with that. Just being within close proximity of people, even a smaller group of people that you're now comfortable being around, that's important. Like one of the big important things for me was at some point early in the pandemic is when we opened up our circle, right? For a couple of months, it was just the four of us that's here, my wife and two kids. And I'm like, we need to be around other people. We need that exposure. Not only is it, of course, good for your psyche and all of that, you also need that exposure to other humans. And so once we started opening up a circle and we started spending actual time with closer family, closer friends, like in normal situation, that's when things really started feeling a lot better, a lot more normal. My goal was actually to get what I call fleeting exposure to the virus, right? Which is kind of how we get exposed to most viruses and all that. We get a fleeting exposure, meaning you're in a public space and there's somebody near you that actually may be quite contagious and they're spewing out virus, but because you're outdoors, their viral particles are getting really diluted in the air, but you might pick some up and it may just be enough to trigger an immune response against it, but not enough to make you sick. That's kind of the best types of protection you can get. It's kind of a natural way of immunizing against the pathogen. So I was actually very excited once things like parks and trails and all of that stuff opened around us, outdoor restaurant areas and all that. We were there the very first day when we could go sit outside and eat, and other people were, 6-8 feet away, and we could maybe get some fleeting exposure. Because again, you can't insulate yourself from these kind of things forever, right? That doesn't do you any good, and it can harm your system.
I love that message. I did it pretty aggressively. I was hanging out with a nurse the whole time, like kind of dating she was like getting off COVID shift. This is in March. I didn't care. I didn't break any laws, but I didn't lock down really. Right. And I exposed myself to a girl who got off a nursing shift in the COVID unit.
Totally. I was similar too. My mom is a doctor and runs a ICU, and her ICU had a number of COVID patients. So she's the doctor that's running the place. And the first time I could see her, I was like, hey, hugs and kisses from my mom. And, we haven't stopped exposure with her because it's good. It's fleeting exposure is going to be good. I mean, she gets tested all the time because she's working in that environment. So we know she's not actively having disease, but maybe there's some exposure and we can get some transient exposure that way too, which is good. Not a bad thing.
Well, we're kind of talking about herd immunity a bit. Can you explain more about herd immunity? Because it's sort of, I don't know if it's like a hot topic or not. I don't watch the news, but it seems like we should be talking about it.
Yeah, herd immunity is really the idea that when you have a certain number of people within a population that has memory immune response to a particular virus or bacteria, they cannot become transmitters of the disease, right? Because they'll never get sick enough with the disease where they can actually transmit it. And so then if you have somewhere around 60, 70% of the population that acts as like a barrier against the spread of the disease, then eventually the disease will just trickle away and not really become a thing. Now, why herd immunity doesn't really work against things like the common cold or the flu virus is because the viruses change from year to year, right? So even though we have a certain degree of protection against it, you can get sick from the common cold twice in 1 year because there's 5 or 6 common cold viruses that go around. So you can get sick from one and then feel fine in a few days and then get sick from another 3 months later. So herd immunity will only work to a certain degree, but what is important with this idea with COVID, and it becomes more important now, is that we have more confirmation that we have longer term protection against COVID. So one of the big issues with can we generate herd immunity, and is that maybe the best way forward of just saying, let's just let people get exposed and then we'll develop herd immunity at some point, then the virus will stop. was the big question was, do we have long-term protection against COVID, right? And they were following antibodies at the time. And what they saw was that over 2.5-month, 3-month period, the antibodies against COVID would fade down to a very low level, sometimes go away. So then the question was, okay, if there's no long-term protection against COVID, you might have it, you might get really sick, and then 4 months later get exposed and get sick again. But as it turns out now, new data has come out to show that your T cells, your memory T cells, are actually what affords you long-term immunity against COVID. So the likelihood of getting reinfected is pretty low because we've got these T cells called memory T cells that actually stand guard, ready should you ever encounter it again. And should you ever encounter it again, they'll go act really quickly. They'll basically knock it down before it even can start, right? So now we know we've got long-term protection. Because we have long-term protection, then the concept of herd immunity becomes more feasible, where at some point, if enough people have had it and have protection against it, then the ability of the virus to spread gets really attenuated.
Absolutely. And you can just see it in the numbers too. In some of these places like Sweden or even Italy, they got hit hard early. It's a bit of a different story, but the vulnerable, unfortunately, got taken and this virus got them. But now that the deaths are hovering around zero in many of these places. So.
And as younger and younger people get sick, like in the US right now, the biggest majority of people that are getting positive are people in that 20 to 28 range, because a lot of it's being spread at places like bars and nightclubs and things like that, right? But the mortality rate is really low in that group, right? So they're getting sick. They can spread it to other people among their peers, but we're not dealing with like this massive spike in mortality. So that's part of how you kind of push the herd immunity is like more and more people within the healthier age group get it, and then develop an immunity against it without the unfortunate outcome of having a high death rate as well. And Sweden, for example, saw that early on, their death rate was much higher than most of their European countries because they're vulnerable and elderly were getting very sick and then succumbing to it. But then it plummeted down as more and more of the healthy part of the population gets it and kind of deals with it.
Well, we need some more common sense approach to this, I think. But we can leave this behind a little bit because there's so much other topics to discuss with the microbiome and all this stuff. Like back to the stuff about exposing yourself to, say, the dog or babies. Like they basically do this for a living. Their full-time job is exposing themselves to things.
Totally. Yeah. And when we look at them as adults, we look at babies as being completely filthy, like even kids, right? When we look at daycare centers or like those ball pits or like the areas where like I take my 7-year-old and 9-year-old to go play, from our standards, filthy places. Why is that? Well, because kids are spewing stuff all the time. They're not concerned about washing their hands. And then their hands, after they touch everything, goes in their eyes and nose and mouth all the time, constantly. They're picking boogers, they're eating it, they're leaving it on things. They're doing things that by adult standards are gross things. But all of those things are actually critically important for the development of their immune system. There's a couple of evolutionary phenomenons that I talk about all the time, even at medical conferences when I present, that are still with us evolutionarily, that I think are there because they're so important for the development of the immune system. The first thing is the fact that every human baby born has a huge tendency to put everything in their mouth, right? They sample the world with their mouth. Which is a really weird thing when you think about it, because as humans, our primary sensory organ is not through taste, right? As an adult, you don't pick up something new that you're looking at and just lick it, right? That's probably the last thing you do. You touch it, you feel it, you see it, you're hearing, you're listening to it, you might shake it. Those are the ways we experience the world. So it's not in our instinct to put things in our mouth to sample it. However, babies up to a certain age have that really strong inborn instinct to put everything in their mouth. And the reason for that is, imagine an ancestral baby that's born in the dirt. They're putting everything in their environment in their mouth, rocks and sand and dirt and dried dung and so on. And in fact, it makes me think about just this weekend, my sister has a young son. He's only about I think he's like a year and a half now old. And they had we went to this frozen yogurt shop and they had this delicious frozen yogurt and all that. And every few minutes when they don't look, he's making a weird noise. And all of a sudden you look at him, he's got a rock in his mouth. It's somehow he finds the moment when no one's looking to pick up a rock off the ground and put it in his mouth. And he's more interested in doing that than putting in the frozen yogurt, right? So it just shows the instinct that they have. That immune sampling is critical, not only for the function of the immune system, but in that case, in the development of the immune system. The immune tissue in your gut is constantly being regenerated, right? It gets infected. There's things going into your system every single day that your immune system has to deal with, that we don't even realize it's dealing with. So there's immune cells that are dying, there's cells that are getting infected, there are immune responses happening that kills off cells. We never feel any of these things. The immune system is doing the job it's supposed to. But that means that the immune system then has to recover. Those cells have to regenerate themselves. The mucosal tissue that makes up a large part of the immune system has to rebuild. A lot of the signals for all of that comes from the microbiome. Right? So the triggering of things like pattern recognition receptors on your gut lining, they get triggered by the presence of bacteria and viruses and all that, mostly the friendly bacteria and viruses that we encounter all the time that aren't trying to kill us. The encountering of those bacteria and viruses triggers our own immune cells to multiply and develop itself. So the maintenance of the system is critically dependent on exposure. Without adequate exposure, the system will become compromised. And that's a really important thing. I'm glad you mentioned a dog. I have 2 dogs myself. Studies show households that have dogs have kids with much lower incidence rate of asthma and allergies and other immune disorders. In January of this year, a study came out that showed that if you bring in a dog into your household, it actually increases your longevity because it improves your immune system, reduces inflammation, and so on. So exposure is critical. So getting out there and being out around people, around animals in the natural area, and I'm talking about, when I say outdoors, I don't necessarily mean the engineered parks that may be in your neighborhood. I'm talking about go for a hike near the river, go for a hike in the woods, forest preserves, places like that.
Yeah, pet a cow, go to a farm.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, I'm guessing you're not a fan of lathering yourself in Purell.
Exactly. No, so March of this year was one of the first times we actually ever bought things like Clorox wipes things. So when this whole thing started, we didn't have enough information about it. So we bought some of that stuff just to have and started using it on things that are coming into the house. And then quickly you realize, okay, that's not really a vector of transfer. That's a problem. So you stop doing that. But if the kids go to the bathroom, the public restroom, I'm going to have them clean their hands and wash their hands. But it's not something that we need to be practicing every single day. Now, in the case of COVID, sure, wash your hands, proper hygiene is a good recommendation, but we don't need to be dousing ourselves with antimicrobials all the time.
So what about antibiotics? Because that's a more extreme version of that, is just basically killing off tons of bacteria in your body.
Yeah, so antibiotics are a really important subject to discuss because there's a couple different aspects to it. Number one is antibiotics do save a lot of lives, right? There are times when you need an antibiotic. I've taken antibiotics before and I was very grateful to have access to it. But even the CDC estimates that at least 50% of antibiotic prescriptions are given when they really aren't going to help. And I've talked to lots of physicians. We're actually trying to develop some products for urgent care clinics because one of the biggest pressures that they feel in urgent care clinics, and remember these are businesses themselves, is to prescribe antibiotics. When someone comes in and they're sick, they're walking into an urgent care facility, they are expecting mentally to leave with a prescription that's going to make them feel better, right? Even though the doctor who's examining them knows this is a viral thing, you're going to feel better in a few days, but there's no pill I can give you for it. Even though they know that, they're going to write a prescription for an antibiotic because they also know that if they don't, the next time that patient won't come to that urgent care clinic, they'll go to a different one, right? So that is the sad fact about the antibiotic side of things, is that so much of it is misused and is used in cases that it really is not going to help. Now, the big problem with that is antibiotics create a definitive dysfunction within your microbiome. There's a whole bunch of studies out there. I'm talking about hundreds of studies that show that if you take a course of antibiotics before you get exposed to a pathogen, it dramatically reduces your immune system's capability of dealing with that pathogen. There's a number of animal-based studies, because you can't do this with humans, but a number of animal-based studies where they give a mouse a course of antibiotics and then expose the mouse to influenza, and the mouse gets way more sick than mice that did not get the antibiotic before getting exposed to influenza, right? They have studies on this immunotherapy for cancer. So immunotherapy for cancer is a way of using your own T cells, your own immune system, to fight the tumors, right? And it can work really well in a certain percentage of people. What they found is if you had a course of antibiotics prior to the immunotherapy, it doesn't work as well. So it will compromise your immune system. And then here's the crazy thing. This is a really interesting study that was published, I believe, by Johns Hopkins University, where they showed the individual in a household taking a course of antibiotics. What they did is they found individuals that were prescribed antibiotics. They were able to get microbiome stool samples from them prior to starting the antibiotic, and then during the course of the antibiotic, and then every single month for 6 months after the course of antibiotics was stopped, right? What they found was there was a definitive change and disruption to their microbiome during the course of the antibiotic. And that disruption was observed even after upwards of 6 months after stopping the antibiotic, right? So it's got a long-term impact on your microbiome. But the crazy thing about that study is they showed that people who lived in the household with the individual taking the antibiotic, and they were not taking the antibiotic, the people who lived in the household also saw a similar dysfunction in their microbiome, even though they didn't take the antibiotic. And the reason for that is we have within our little micro circles of people we're close to, roommates and partners and kids and all that in the same household, we share a microbiome cloud around us. We exchange microbes all the time, whether we know it or not, right? And so if one person has a dysfunctional microbiome and they're taking a course of antibiotics, or in this case, it could be they're not living a pretty healthy lifestyle, they're going to negatively influence the microbiomes of those that they're close to. I mean, that's a huge impact. So if you're living and you're trying to make your best decisions, eating right, and your roommate is sitting on the couch all day long, eating Cheetos and is immobile and not moving around, that roommate's going to impact your health through your microbiome.
Yeah. I mean, I knew like dust is just dead skin cells, and there's all kinds of stuff just floating around.
So think about dust. I'm glad you brought that up. About 90% of the solid matter of dust is dead human skin cells. Skin cells are actually dead to begin with, but they're skin cells. For every one skin cell on your epidermal layer, you've got about 30 bacteria that sit on that cell. So the dust you can see around, 30 times that is microbes. And then if you look at things like you go to the bathroom and you sit on a toilet, you defecate, and then you flush. One of the things that happens when you flush is it spins everything around. That actually aerosolizes bacteria from your stool into the air. And then your intake system for your air is going to suck it in. It's going to go through your air conditioning and get blown back out. You know, there's bacteria everywhere in your environment. And so your unhealthy microbes can actually influence people that are close to you in a profound way.
Wow. Well, there's other things I wanted to talk about, like gluten and dairy, because a lot of people have problems with that, and leaky gut. I mean, we got to get back into leaky gut and how it really is a root of a lot of things. But are you of the thought that gluten's pretty much bad for everybody? Some people are like, oh, well, I'm not gluten tolerant, but it's like, I wasn't gluten tolerant, but I cut it out and all these great things happen. So how does gluten even work in your body?
Yeah, so the whole idea that you can be not gluten intolerant has been now diminished by a number of studies that have come out. So what they've been able to show is that 100% of people get transient intestinal permeability when gluten enters your small intestine, right? So it does that for 100% of people. It doesn't matter if you're celiac, gluten intolerant, or never have had an issue with gluten. It's causing that in everybody. Now, here's the difference. Only 1 in 8 people who have some sort of sensitivity to gluten actually get GI symptoms, right? And that's where we falter, because we associate gluten intolerance with GI symptoms. Because the people that are really sensitive to it, when they eat something like a crouton or bread, they'll feel it within a few hours and maybe for the next couple of days, right? They'll feel the GI symptoms. But you'll never eat a piece of bread and then 6 hours later can't fall asleep because you're not producing enough GABA and your anxiety is a little heightened, And you wouldn't attribute that to the gluten you ate earlier, right? But that's the kind of impact it can have. The reason is because what gluten does that is damaging to the body is it triggers intestinal permeability or leaky gut, right? So gluten is a little peptide that is just the right structure and size where it is antigenic. Antigenic meaning it triggers a response to your immune system. But the problem with gluten is it triggers this inflammatory response to your immune system. So if gluten is allowed to pass your stomach into your small intestine, as it settles into your intestinal lining, it's going to cause the recruitment of immune cells, which will then create a massive inflammatory response around it. And that's going to damage the tissue around it and cause a transient permeability in that area. So if you're doing that all the time, if you're eating gluten frequently, you're going to get the damage, your body might be able to repair it. And then you're going to get the damage, your body might be able to repair it. But eventually the repair slows down, end up with a net damage. And that net damage is going to lead to a net amount of leaky gut, and that has all kinds of health implications. And it's not just in the gut. It could be anything. It could be affecting your mood. It could be affecting your ability to sleep. It could be affecting your recall function, your short-term memory. It could be affecting your joints, your skin. There's all kinds of things that get impacted by it that are not related to the gut.
I think everything you've mentioned, people experience on a regular basis and don't associate it. And I think almost everything you mentioned, I experienced. And then when I stopped eating it, it kind of went away. I mean, you mentioned Alzheimer's disease earlier, and people who've been listening for a while know about my mom. Basically, I lost both my parents to these things. It's kind of woke up to this health world. How does that work with Alzheimer's and the gut?
Yeah. So September 2017, a paper was published showing the main source of inflammatory damage that occurs in the brain in the development of Alzheimer's. So Alzheimer's was discovered a long time ago, and it was realized that it's a neurodegenerative disorder, right? So there are parts of the brain that start getting damaged, and you start losing that functionality of the brain and the connectivity within the brain itself. Then a decade or so after that original discovery, they understood that there's these things called beta amyloid plaques that form in the brain. So there's this looks like plaquing or scabbing of the brain tissue. Then they realize, all of that beta amyloid plaquing occurs because of inflammation that occurs in the brain. Because initially it was thought of as maybe people just have a genetic SNP where at some point in your life that those genes get triggered and it starts forming this plaquing in the brain. As it turns out, there's a genetic risk to Alzheimer's for sure, but that's not what is the big trigger to starting the disease process. It's inflammation. And then finally in 2017, a paper came out to show the source of the inflammation that kicks off Alzheimer's. And that is something called lipopolysaccharide, or LPS, which is an endotoxin that's formed in your gut. Now, 70% or so of the microbes that live in your gut make this endotoxin, right? It's one of the most common compounds found in the gut microbiome. And it's perfectly fine as long as it's in the lumen, which, remember, is still outside of the body. If it's allowed to leak through the lining and enter into circulation, that's when it can cause severe problems. This LPS from the gut will make its way into the brain, and it'll trigger an inflammatory response in the brain, which causes damage to the tissue. And that damage is the inflammatory cascade that progresses the pathology of Alzheimer's. So that 2017 paper was the first sign that a major trigger for the start of Alzheimer's was gut-derived LPS and leaking through, so leaky gut.
So maybe we should go high level then. How do most people suffer this leaky gut, and from what foods or what lifestyle?
Yeah. So one of the unfortunate things for all of us is that if you live in the Western world, you are more than likely to be set up for leaky gut, because leaky gut is a dysbiotic issue, right? Meaning you've got an imbalance of functionalities within your microbiome. So there's lots of groups of microbes within your microbiome that create specific functions. There's a whole bunch of microbes whose job it is to maintain that barrier so your gut is not leaky. Own genetics have very limited resources in rebuilding and maintaining the barrier. We actually count on microbes to trigger some of the signals to repair the barrier system for us. In fact, one example of that, one of the really important aspects of the barrier is this mucosal lining, right? It's this thick mucus lining sitting on top of the intestinal cells. That mucus lining provides a physical barrier for things leaking through and then entering and going past your intestinal cells. So that mucosal barrier is really important. That mucosal barrier in your gut lining is made by cells called goblet cells. Goblet cells sitting on your intestinal lining produce mucus, right? Now, in order for the goblet cell to produce mucus, it has to be triggered by a bacteria that's sitting in the lining of your gut. On top of that, in order for the goblet cell to have the right energy and the right compounds to produce the mucus, it has to be stimulated by butyrate, which is a short-chain fatty acid that's produced by your microbes in your gut. So the formation and the maintenance of this wall-like structure on the gut lining that protects you against the vast majority of chronic illnesses is dependent on microbes in order to exist and function the way it's supposed to, right? So all of these, the dismantling of that kind of control mechanism is what leads to leaky gut. And in the Western world, unfortunately, we are surrounded by things that lead to that microbial dismantling. Number one is things like Roundup in our water and our food supply and all that, right? It's a powerful glyphosate, yep. It's a powerful antibacterial, antimicrobial that kills bacteria in your gut. Even things like the chlorine in your drinking water, the fluoride in your drinking water, all of the preservatives and antimicrobials in your food system, in packaged food products or things that are used to clean and sterilize food before package. Of course, antibiotic use, as I mentioned earlier, to 6 months to 2 years after a single exposure to a course of antibiotics, your microbiome is still dysfunctional, right? So think about it. Most people have had multiple courses of antibiotics throughout their lives. All of these things, and poor diet, really low diversity in your diet, eating just basically processed foods, all of those things contain chemicals, compounds, and all that hurt your microbiome. And the moment your microbiome gets hurt, the intestinal permeability gets compromised and increases over time. I would say, so we screened our first study that we published on leaky gut. We screened 100 healthy young adults. And when I say healthy, I mean they had no chronic illness. They'd never been diagnosed with anything, not on any medication, of normal body weight. 55% of them had severe leaky gut. We tested them, right? 55%.
What is this study?
This was our study we published in 2017, the endotoxemia leaky gut study. So that was one of our first clinical trials that we did and we published. We've since done 18 other clinical trials, published maybe about 9. But this was a study on the spore-based probiotics, showing how the spore-based probiotics in a 30-day period can seal up the gut and stop that leakiness in the gut and stop the migration of toxins like the LPS we talked about, stopping that from migrating from the gut lumen into the circulation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know about that. Maybe I should have done more research. But maybe we're...
There's a lot to read out there.
Yeah. This is big because, I mean, I guess we didn't mention it yet. I mean, this is what you do for a living. You're a microbiologist. You work with spore-based probiotics. And maybe you could kind of clear up some of this stuff about probiotics, because a lot of people, and myself, I didn't really believe in them. And I think there is some stuff that isn't great. And there's different kinds of probiotics. So why don't you kind of break it down for us?
Yeah, the general idea of how companies have been formulating probiotic products doesn't fit our understanding of the microbiome. I mean, it still is for the most part, just kind of more is better. Let's just throw a whole bunch of strains into a product and it's 15 strains. And then the next company's coming out with 19 strains and 25, and it just keeps going up and up and up. Mm-hmm. And then the doses are 50 billion, no 100 billion, no 200 billion. And there's no scientific rationale behind any of that, right? There's no studies that show that 50 billion is not as good functionality wise as 100 billion. There's some sort of improvement in that range. There isn't. This is just kind of marketing megalomaniacal thinking, right? It's like, if my competitor has 100 billion, I want 110 billion just to be a little bit better. And most of the bacteria that's used as probiotics in the probiotic world are just going to die in your stomach. You know, they don't have the ability to make it through, right? And so what we're doing when we consume all of these products, we're just taking in a bunch of dead bacteria. Now, some of those dead bacteria, you know, the outer wall, cell membranes and all that can have a stimulatory effect on your immune system, which may be beneficial, but it's not really going in and changing anything about your microbiome. And so when we started looking at probiotics almost 10 years ago, we started saying, okay, what are there microbes that are designed to survive through this gastric system? And our hypothesis was, if they're designed to survive through this really strong system that's designed to kill bacteria, then maybe they function as a probiotic naturally. And so we came across these spore-based bacteria that have this capability when they're outside of the body to cover themselves with the armor-like coating. It's like a protein calcified coating, and that allows them to exist in the outside environment indefinitely, literally for tens of millions of years. And then when you consume them, they actually are resilient to the stomach acid and the bile salts and all that, so they can get to the intestines alive and functioning. And when they get there, they start cleaning up the space. One of the first applications for spore-based probiotics came when Sanofi-Aventis launched them as a prescription drug in 1952. It was launched as a way of treating dysentery and other gut infections, because they found that when you take the spore-based probiotics, they go in, they seek out dysfunctional bacteria that are overgrown, certainly any producing toxins and creating havoc. They will sit next to them and they will bring down the growth of those bacteria in a relatively short amount of time. So it's like they are like the SEAL Team 6, if you will, of gut protectors. They go in there, they know how to read the microbial environment, they find the potentially harmful bacteria and they bring them down. And then at the same time, our hypothesis was, if they can read the environment to know what are dysfunctional bacteria and bring them down, maybe they have a way of improving the growth of really important bacteria within the gut. And sure enough, they have that. We published a paper last year in August that showed that when you add the spore-based probiotics into the gut, obviously they have the capability of bringing down bad bacteria, but they seem to increase the growth of your really important commensal protective bacteria that live within your gut. So they're like the orchestrators of the microbiome. So it was based on that hypothesis that we said, okay, if they can change the microbiome, maybe they can seal up this leaky gut, right? And so that was the study we published in 2017 showing that sure enough, in as little as 30 days, they were able to seal up that leakiness in the gut and prevent that permeability issue where things are leaking into your circulation.
Well, that's amazing. And do we have good tests? I mean, I know there's the PEG 400. I think the stool tests aren't so great, because a lot of people listening are like, okay, how do I know if I have this? And I don't think it's like super easy or cheap ways to do it.
Yeah, there's no easy way to test for leaky gut. We can do it in a research environment. We test for LPS, that lipopolysaccharide, that endotoxin in the blood leaking in from the gut. We can test for that. The easiest way to go about it is assume that you have leaky gut because you live in the Western world and just treat it. And part of the treatment is lifestyle, right? That's a really important part of treatment. Like what you did in shifting your diet, what you didn't know you were doing was you were healing and treating your leaky gut. Right. And that's hence why you saw all of these health benefits from cleaning up your lifestyle. You can absolutely do that. You add in the spore-based probiotics. They help tremendously. When we did this study, we did not change anything about those people's lifestyle. The subjects in the study, the ones that had really severe leaky gut, they just ate and drank everything they normally do and lived the lifestyle they normally do. And we just added the probiotic. And even that was enough to bring down the leakiness in the gut. You combine that with a couple of lifestyle improvements with diet, exercise, getting more exposure, and you're going to seal that gut up, and that chronic low-grade inflammation will go down. So to me, when it comes to leaky gut, you don't need to test it. You can safely presume you have it. And if you've ever had any health issues, if you've ever had allergies, you have leaky gut. If you've ever had anxiety, you have leaky gut. If you've ever had skin issues, you have leaky gut. I mean, it drives all of these things.
I completely agree. I just got really mad. I went to the skin doctor years ago and I had this like redness in my face and, it was my diet. And the lady like laughed me out of the room that I suggested it was from something I'm eating. And I was like, I can't go back here. Like this is, so I'm into these spore-based probiotics. I haven't tried them yet, but I think we should talk about developing one.
Yeah. I look forward to you trying it. It makes such a big difference because the more finite things that become really hard to change in your gut, even through lifestyle and diet, can get addressed pretty quickly with the spore-based probiotics. Now, one things I really liked about the spore-based probiotics is that it has evolutionary support, right? We talked about how we have to be conscious about how we function evolutionarily and go back as close as we can to that kind of function to maintain health. There are studies that show that these particular spore species were very abundant in the Earth's environment 3-5 million years ago throughout the course of human evolution. And so our ancestors got huge doses of these microbes every single day from eating dirt, drinking waters out of rivers and streams, and not sterilizing their environment, right? So there's an important relationship we've developed with these bacteria where we've outsourced a number of critical functions to these microbes with the presumption that we're going to continuously be exposed to these microbes. But of course, in the modern world, we've put barriers between us and the environment. And so we no longer get the exposure to these microbes. And so they're sitting there out there in the environment with the tools and the genes ready to fix our gut and clean up our gut. We're just not getting them into our system. That's why we created the product. And we said, okay, a really important fundamental aspect of living more like our ancestors did is getting these microbes into our system.
You almost just answered my last question here, because I'm really interested in not doing supplements, not, just it's all with our diet and lifestyle, get everything naturally. But this makes sense, is that why it's necessary, and that we are in this artificial environment. I mean, that's really where everything goes wrong. The more I study it, the more I realize all it is. I mean, it's not like I made this up. The mismatched diseases. It's the modern environment doesn't match our ancient genes and what we expect. And so you're saying it's kind of just augmenting nature in a little bit and getting them to us. So I want to do something for Sapien or Nose to Tail. I don't want to get into supplements. I'm like whole foods, but this might be the one thing that I try to develop with you and your company, because I think it seems to, you sold me, you got me.
Yeah, it really, what you do is really a very critical part, because you can't supplement your way out of bad decisions, right? Out of bad eating decisions, lifestyle decisions. So I think it's really important to follow the kinds of things that you do. And that's a big service, I think, to the community. But a difference between what our ancestor would have done in terms of eating, for example, meat or steak, is they would have slaughtered that in the outside environment, right? And a lot of microbes would have been on that meat, and they would have consumed lots of those microbes that are picked up from the environment because they would have eaten it there. We see that, for example, if you look at the tribes in Papua New Guinea, the hunter-gatherer tribes, one of their delicacies that they love is porcupine, right? And so they'll go out, a little hunting party will go out to hunt for porcupine. One of the first things they do when they kill the porcupine is they cut open the gut right there on site, and then they eat contents of the intestines. And one of the things that's in there is lots of these spores. We have access to things, foods and all that are much more similar to what we ate throughout the course of evolution. What's still missing is getting these spores into our system in adequate amounts. I would say if you're going and you're going to live in the side of a mountain and live a very ancestral life and dig for roots and tubers and gather and hunt and all that, you probably don't need it. But if we live in a modern world and we're making all the right choices, it's a huge benefit to add them back into your system.
I agree. And I guess just the last tiny question is, you mentioned that ancestral eating and the meats, and I did an amazing interview with the scientist from Greenland talking about even the fermented meats. She's saying it's all about the processing and the consumption of it. It's like you ruin anything by doing it in the modern way. And that, yes, there was all these microbes on the meat when they did it naturally. And they even had fermented meats and then fermented vegetables. So if you quickly I'm really into a lot of meats and nose to tail foods and fermented vegetables like sauerkrauts and kimchi, stuff like that. So, I mean, to maintain a good microbiome and healthy gut wall and all that, do you need tons of whole grains or stuff like that? Like, can you get enough of the butyrate and all these things from animal foods and say some probiotic plant foods?
Yeah, you could. I mean, if the plant-based foods you're eating are certain fermented plant-based foods, then you'll absolutely get enough of the starting material, which will then create the formation of butyrate and propionate and all these short-chain fatty acids in your gut. I think where we will tend to go wrong if we do things like this, like if we go full keto and we're just keto for a long period of time, that's going to impact the diversity in your microbiome, right? Because we didn't come from ancestral stock that's designed to eat 85%, 90% fat in the diet, right? We're not descendants of Inuit Indians. And so most people that listen to this are come from a European descendant, and that European descendant ate some degree of plant-based material within their diet. And so you've got a lot of microbes in your gut that only can feed on plant-based nutrients. And so you'll have to get some of it in there, but have to be vegan or vegetarian to get all the benefits out of plants, right? You can add some in, and certainly if you ferment some, that actually enhances the nutritional quality of the plant-based foods. And then you want to be careful about things that tend to have high oxalates or phytates and things like that. That could be anti-nutrients as well, right? So one of the people that I like of how he kind of designed kind of a more complex, he calls it a carnivore diet, but it's not the carnivore diet in the way a lot of people think about it, is Dr. Al Dennenberg, the periodontist. And he's got a really cool one where he has certain types of key plants in there. It's a small portion of the whole diet, but still it's enough to feed the microbes that are critical.
Yeah, I've heard an interview with him. Yeah, it sounds really interesting. And it's similar to what I do. I mean, I'm going away from the plant antinutrients. Like I got caught in the spinach and kale shake craze years ago. I don't know. I don't think that serves me well. I think it's very possible. And then even just having connective tissue. I mean, what do you think that
That's
helps?
critical. Yes. Yeah. So I think where people really go wrong with meat is they're only eating that protein, right? They're not eating any organs. They're not eating the connective tissue. That's where a lot of the nutrients are coming from, right? Because keep in mind that most of the things we eat are vegetarian things, right? So the animals themselves tend to eat plants, and then they're getting all of those phytonutrients and all that in the plants, but it's sitting in their fat. It's sitting in their connective tissue. It's in their collagen, all of that stuff. So to get all of those nutrients out of them, we have to eat a much wider spread. We can't just take one little fillet, and just focus on the one fillet and then just eat that and call that a healthy animal-based diet, right? That's not going to provide you what you need.
Yeah, I totally agree. Nose and tail and just varied. Yes, I wouldn't do keto for years on end. It's like no one ate like that for long periods of times. We were always changing. So
we didn't have the luxury, right? So with the exception of maybe Inuit Indians that did eat higher levels of fat for a longer period of time, but then as it turns out, some of the latest research shows that they actually have a genetic SNP that allows them to utilize fat differently. But they also do have equal cardiovascular disease rates as people in the Western world. The ideas was that, with Inuit Indians, they can eat all the fat but they don't have any cardiovascular disease. As it turns out, they do, but they're like their own little special genetic pool, right? So we can't take what that very specialized type of population does and extrapolate it to everybody.
Yeah, is that modernized people are getting the cardiovascular, or is it?
No, so even they looked at, there's anthropological evidence, there's other evidence from I think the first study on this was published in the late 1950s, where they showed relatively high levels of inflammation, cardiovascular disease, vascular edema, and all of these problems with the way they eat. Inuit Indians that have a genetic SNP that actually allows them to better utilize fat from their diet. So then they've got a natural selection even among their population for people that have a mutation that helps them deal with that level of constant fat intake all the time. Now, then of course you go to the other extreme where then people are saying fat is bad, right? So, which is also not true in any way. And so the idea here is that really it's about eating a variety. If you're going to eat meat, like you say, eat a variety of it, right? You got to eat from the nose to tail like our ancestors did. They would not go through the effort of killing something and then cut out a nice little piece of 8 ounces of steak and then leave the rest of it. They ate everything, they utilized everything, right? And they got all the benefits from it. And one of the things I think that you said that's important is I think people have to kind of figure out what works for their system. I don't believe that there's going to be a one size fits all. It's not like the carnivore diet may really work well for this person, but it may be quite detrimental to this other person depending on what they have within their microbiome. Let me just give you one example of that. There are microbes within your gut microbiome that are called sulfate-reducing bacteria, right? If you tend to have high levels of sulfate-reducing bacteria, certain really healthy foods like things like mushrooms, sauerkraut, and not sauerkraut. What is that vegetable that kids really hate?
Onions have a lot of it.
Onions do. Leeks and onions have a lot of sulfates, right? And some fish have a lot of sulfates. So Brussels sprouts, that's right. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of. All of these seemingly healthy foods, but they're high sulfate foods. And what happens to those foods when they enter your gut is your sulfate-reducing bacteria will convert that to hydrogen sulfide. And the hydrogen sulfide is incredibly inflammatory to your bowel. In fact, elevated hydrogen sulfide is a risk for inflammatory bowel disease, right? So you could have one person here eating what seems to be healthy food, but it's destroying their gut. And then you could have another person that doesn't have elevated sulfate reducing bacteria. They can eat those foods and do perfectly well with them, and it's good for them, right? They'll get the benefit out of it without the dysfunction. So a lot of how your body responds to the food that you eat is dependent on the groups of bacteria that you have. So it'll take a little bit of trial and error to figure out what is actually really good for your system. There are some people that go keto and it just makes them sick. They can't do it, right? It shuts down their energy. They get the keto flu. They get all kinds of issues. There's some people that go to keto and it becomes the best thing they've ever done, right? So you got to kind of try it out a little bit. To me, the best chance of having something that works more universally is something that has a little bit more balance to it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to eliminate things that we know are bad for everybody. I think most of us know what some of those things are.
Okay, fine detail into this. Can you change your microbiome though? Like get some of those bacteria that will help digest the mushrooms or the onions or the Brussels sprouts?
Totally. Yeah. So that's the beauty of what we're learning about the microbiome is that, number one, most chronic illnesses are driven by dysfunctions in the microbiome, right? They're not driven by your own genetic mishaps. They're driven by an ecological problem in your microbiome. The benefit of that is that you can always change your microbiome. And by changing your microbiome, you can change your risk and you can change your outcomes quite dramatically. That's what's, to me, the most exciting thing about the age that we live in is because we're learning more about how we function. We're learning more about what makes us sick. And we're learning that we can change all of these things. If you've been dealing with skin issues for 20 years, you can still change it. There's still time to improve those things and repair it. So the changing of the microbiome is absolutely critical. How you change your microbiome, like what are the basic things you want to do to change your microbiome, that can become a little bit more specialized depending on what your issues are. But some of the basic things that everybody can improve on are diversity in the microbiome. So increasing some of the diversity of what you eat, like, for example, nose to tail idea, like you don't just eat the fillet out of an animal, you eat some connective tissue, you eat some organ meats and all that. So that increasing the diversity within your microbiome, because the more different types of nutrients you put into your system, the more diverse your microbiome becomes. Another simple thing you can do is add some fasting in. I don't know if you've tried to do intermittent fasting, right? But if you add in some fasting, it dramatically improves the diversity of your microbiome. In fact, it increases the growth of certain keystone strains. Exercise has been shown to modulate your microbiome in a very positive way. Reducing stress. Reducing stress has a huge impact on your microbiome and can shift the microbiome quite a bit. There are lots of opportunistic pathogens in your gut, viruses and bacteria that only proliferate in times of stress. So when they sense stress, they will start proliferating and overgrowing. So you can modulate your microbiome by doing that. Of course, cleaning up your environment around you, right? Anything that is in you, on you, or surrounding you has an impact of your microbiome. It could be that one roommate that's just not cleaning up his or her act and they're impacting your microbiome, right? You may want to surround yourself with people who have similar mindsets and lifestyle and habit, because then you're going to share more beneficial microbes. You want to stop sterilizing every aspect of your home and the place you live. You don't need to Clorox every surface of your home for it to be quote unquote clean. Everything you put on you shouldn't be using lotions and deodorants and all that have chock full of chemicals and things that you would never understand what they are, let alone put on your system, right? So just those simple things, and then getting enough exposure, right? Going out and interacting with animals, getting a dog if you don't have one, going and interacting with people. And now during COVID, that's a little more complicated, but COVID's going to go away and you want to go back to that lifestyle of actually being around other people. So lots of little things you can do to improve your microbiome, and all of those things will have a measurable impact over time.
I love that. I'm making new skincare products made of just beef tallow and a few other things.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Nose to tail. Okay, we just didn't hit on the tiniest thing is, say with onions, if someone can't and they have all those, can they eat a little bit of onions? I mean, I just like onion and I eat them with my meat, right? So a little at a time, is that the move?
Yep, little at a time. And over a period of time, when you don't eat sulfate-rich foods, like if you don't eat a high amount of sulfate-rich foods, the sulfate-reducing bacteria counts will go down. Mm-hmm. And then bacteria that counteract the sulfate-reducing bacteria will go up. So then their numbers will come down, which means that you can actually add in now more sulfate rich foods. So absolutely, and it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, right? My whole focus with the microbiome is like 80% good decisions will really net you a positive gain, right? You could still make 20% bad decisions. You could still have something that is not good for you or your microbiome once a week somewhere. And as long as you give yourself time to recover, your body will recover from it, right? And my whole, people always ask me, what's your goal for your microbiome? And my entire goal for my microbiome is resilience. Because I know I'm not going to live a perfect lifestyle, right? I know I'm susceptible to having cupcakes here and there, especially if it's someone's birthday party or going out with friends and having drinks and all that. You need the resilience to be able to allow your body to handle that and recover from it.
Yeah, you want to be anti-fragile. I love my carnivore friends, but I don't think they're very anti-fragile if they have one bite of squash and their whole body breaks down. So
totally. Yeah, that we need that resilience. That's really the key, because that makes life more fun to live. It's hard to be absolutely pigeonholed into one way of functioning. And again, you don't want your whole system to fall apart because you stepped outside of that system.
Well, yeah, or even with a healthy thing like a carbohydrate. So totally. I love that. Yeah. Live like a human. This is the sapient lifestyle we're talking about. Everything you said is great. Yeah, just get outdoors, sun, nature, low stress, good sleep, everything. I love it. Thank you so much. We've gone over a little bit, but I appreciate you.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Always great to share knowledge with people, and hopefully, people will absorb some of this and make small changes. And every small change will have an impact.
I love it. All right, take care.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, that's a wrap, everyone. Thanks for listening. Thanks for giving the podcast a review on the podcast app or on iTunes. Thanks for sharing with a friend. Go to sapient.org to check out all that we're doing. Foodlies.org is where the film's at. Nosetotail.org, where you can get the grass-finished meat delivered to you. And sapient.org, where you can look at the program and the tribe. Join us. We're doing great things. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you next week.